We're beginning Chapter 20, Wally's World. Although in many media appearances, Rudy Deckers portrayed himself as both president and owner of Huffman Aviation, this claim, like so many others of Deckers' pronouncements, was untrue. We all knew that the money Pete Deckers flaunted was not even his money, stated Tom Hammersley. What we heard was that Heat Deckers had somebody in Naples backing him financially, that he was just a front man for the man who had all the money. Deckers never actually owned the flight school, we discovered. It was a ruse, a paper agreement which was never executed or meant to be. Wally Hillard owned Huffman Aviation. He was the sole owner. He had been all along. We discovered this only after Hillard sued Deckers. His erstwhile partner, Hillard was in the midst, in fact, of suing a number of his employees and business partners. He sued Stuart Burkill, his accountant, and he sued business partner Mark Shubin. If it came to it, his defense was going to be that he had been victimized by unscrupulous employees, a lot of unscrupulous employees. Court documents filed at the Sarasota courthouse in Hillard's suit against Rudy revealed that Deckers never completed the terms of the Huffman sale with Hillard. Rudy neglected to pay for his shares of stock in the resulting corporation, said Hillard's filing. In the suit, Hillard accused Deckers of failing to pay for 1,000 shares of Huffman Aviation stock called for in their partnership agreement, as well as failing to pay loans he'd made to Deckers since 1999. Hillard's lawsuit said that, as a matter of contract law, he had been Huffman Aviation's true owner. At exactly the same time, a Hillard-owned Learjet was involved in narcotics smuggling. This is probably just a coincidence. Still, it was time to take a closer look at the 70-year-old financier and multi-millionaire businessman Hillard, the linchpin to the goings-on in Venice when the terrorists came to town. When we finally met him, Wally Hillard turned out to be a slim, well-preserved 70-year-old man with thinning reddish hair and still bright blue eyes, impeccably attired in slacks and a gray golf sweater, affixed with the insignia of the Augusta National Country Club. The Huffman Aviation secretive owner, you're well known in Southwest Florida aviation circles, we began as the money man and deep-pocketed financial backer of Rudy Deckers. So just who is Wally Hillard, the man who had all the money? We refused to offer to tell. We have to find out for ourselves. Wally Hillard is the founder and former president of several Green Bay, Wisconsin-based health insurance companies. At the age of 65, he'd retired to Naples, Florida. In 1996, he was described in local newspaper articles as a Florida businessman who made his career as an insurance executive in Green Bay, Wisconsin. How did a bland Midwestern insurance executive get involved in major intrigue in Florida, even among those who work with him? Few profess to have a clue. He was considered in aviation circles to be something of a mystery. I was Wally's jet manager, my office jet next to his. I could overhear everything he said. I still don't know who he is, John Villata stated flatly. Hillard's business partners profess to be mystified as well. Nobody knows for sure who Wally works for, said Mark Subin, himself a bit of a mystery, as well as a partner of Wally's several aviation ventures. Wally was colorful as well. Not many business executives can boast a 21-year-old secretary who gets arrested for trafficking heroin while she's working for them. Wally and Rudy can. Summer Jeffries worked in Hillard and Deckers' Naples office. Summer was street smart, but had a coke problem, said Villata. She was busted for 10 bags of heroin. Summer's bust revealed the level of surveillance Hillard's operations were receiving before 9/11. She told me that when they brought her in for interrogation, Velada said, that they showed her dozens of surveillance photos of her with Wally and Rudy, and she said there was even one of me getting in a Learjet with Wally. When I asked the FBI later why they had so many pictures of me, they said just be careful because you've got your name on a list. Summers was busted for trafficking, not possession. How does a 20-year-old girl get involved in trafficking heroin? The question hung in the air. Rudy Deckers didn't impress locals as a budding James Bond. But Wally was a different story. Some in aviation at the Venice airport thought it conceivable that Wally might be, of all things, a spy. You think of these guys looking like James Bond or, wearing flowered shirts and carrying Walther PPKs, said Coy Jacob. It seemed like he, Rudy, wasn't quite as astute as I would have thought someone in the intelligence community would be. Yeah, a lot of them are fucking just wild cowboys. Wally certainly could be, though. Wally was unassuming, a nice guy, had a cell phone ringing all the time, and had an affinity for Learjets. Wally may have been a man with a busy cell phone and an affinity for Learjets, but he wasn't a businessman anymore. His aviation businesses weren't designed to make money, we heard over and over. When we learned of the staggering sums Hillard has invested in aviation after supposedly retiring to Florida, we were stunned. Wally's lost $40 million in the last 3 years, which is easy to do if you are spending $14 million on jets in 1 year as he did, explained jet manager Velada. How does a retired insurance executive from Green Bay, Wisconsin lose $40 million? Whose money was Hillard throwing around? I managed all of his jets, and I said to him, you have people flying all over the world, and you don't know where they are and where they're going. This is crazy. Wally's planes went all over the free world flying wildly, Velada said. How could you have a fleet of jets and not even know what they're doing? But the pilot's attitude was always, I'm not telling you where I've been, and I'm not telling you where I'm going. Whatever Hillard was doing cost lots of money. The man quickly bought, in very short order, a fleet of 12 to 15 jets. He spent between $30 and $40 million on planes, and he still has 20 very expensive airplanes left, including Lear 35s and Gulfstreams. Flight manager Danielle Clark in Naples told us Hillard liked to portray himself as a pious man. Wally came in quite a bit, seemed very compassionate, made a lot of references to God, she said. You'd be talking about business, and all of a sudden, he'd mention the good Lord, and it got to be a bit much. As a man of God, Hillard's taste in secretaries was fairly ungodly. Summer was 5'7", with long blonde hair. She wore exceedingly short skirts and very low-cut tops. You were struggling to find a bit of cloth on the woman, said Danielle tartly. Another odd note was that Hillard also hobnobbed with characters you might not expect a Midwestern insurance executive to come across. Aviation mechanic Dave Montgomery, known as Jet Dave at the Naples airport, told of witnessing a secretive meeting between Wally and Miami Dolphins owner Wayne Huizenga, for example, who choppered in on a large helicopter with the Dolphins logo emblazoned on the side. Hillard got into the helicopter, and the two men held a meeting that lasted almost an hour before Hillard excited and the helicopter took off. Almost 40 years ago, Wayne Huizinga was a founder of Waste Management, we learned, which grew to become the nation's largest trash hauler. As anyone who's ever watched The Sopranos can tell you, garbage is a big, big business. Hillard flirted with disaster in ways more staid executives avoided. He was recently subpoenaed by a federal court in Denver, for example, in a case in which he bought a plane for a man with connections to a Colombian drug cartel. We wondered, how does a Midwestern insurance executive get connected to a guy fronting planes for drug kingpins from Colombia? He had sold group health to the Medellin cartel. Maybe Green Bay, Wisconsin had a sister city somewhere in Colombia. Why Wally went to Colorado to testify, said the source, was because years ago, Wally bought a King Air B-200 from the Colombian Mafia. According to Stuart Burkill, Hillard's former accountant, Donald Pritchard was taking deposits on planes and then not producing the planes. He called Wally and told him he had a plane in South America and said he was going to ship it up. He, Pritchard, would advertise a plane for sale, do a contract, wire a deposit, then he'd started stalling and would never deliver the planes. Why would a retired insurance executive be dealing with an international thief? Everybody knows a general in South America who they can get really good deals from on planes, replied Burkill. You can get a jet in Mexico for $1 million less than its invoice. Pay 1.5 mil instead of 3, and people do it. It's agreed. I just don't get it. He, Hillard, has some mysterious understanding about the deal that I didn't see. I saw him throwing money away. Why was Wally throwing money away? Did he suffer from a premature senility? Did he suffer from premature senility? Had he fallen prey to people who took advantage of old men? If he was such a sucker, how did he get so rich? Not too many suckers are friends with the President of the United States. Hillard was friends with Clinton. He kept a picture taken of himself with Clinton prominently displayed in his $3 million Naples, Florida home. Wally knew Clinton well, confirmed a former employee. Clinton called Wally a couple of times when I was there. Hillard had been in business with an international cast. We recalled the doubts expressed by jet mechanic and Dave Montgomery. Why is Wally doing business with all these foreigners? There's Diego Levine, Alfonso Bo, a black South African who runs Wally's FBO in Nassau, Bahamas. Wally went to South Africa with him to see the vineyards. And Pervez Khan, Pakistani, Mark Shubin, who's Russian, and used to fly for the Israeli Air Force. Mark Subin was Hillard's business partner in a number of airplanes, including a $35 million Gulfstream. Subin lived in Miami. We had heard a number of different stories about him, each more lurid than the next. Mark Subin is a KGB agent married to an American woman, said one usually reliable aviation source. Mark Subin is ex-Jamaican military in his 50s and ex-KGB colonel, said another. His family was in the trade for the pilot who got shot down over Russia in a U-2. Subin, an ex-CIA pilot who also flew U-2s over Russia. He's also flown for the Israeli military. He's also connected with the Russian mob, a third source said. Mark Subin used to fly for the KGB. He used to fly the president of Russia, Putin, and he still has one of Wally Falcon's 10 jets. If only 1/10 of this was true, it was quite a curriculum vitae. We were anxious to meet Mr. Shubin. He sounded like a swashbuckling, interesting character. If Wally Hillard, the man who owned Huffman Aviation, was in business with a KGB agent, even former KGB agent, it would be pretty big news. We figured news that big would have already been on CNN. On the off chance it hadn't, we'd traveled to Fort Lauderdale to meet the man himself. In his office in a hangar at the Fort Lauderdale Executive Airport, Mark Subin came across as a pleasant and highly intelligent man in his late 50s who carried, or so it seemed to us, an aura of authority. The first thing we noted when we arrived was that the offices of his company, Skybus Incorporated, was located in the same hangar as the Whittington Brothers Company, WorldJet. Somehow it seemed prudent not to mention it, at least not right off the bat. We told him what we'd heard about him. He smiled a little in bemusement as we spoke. Then he nodded and said, "You know more about me than the FBI." The true story was that Subin's father was indeed a KGB colonel imprisoned after being caught by his own government spying for the United States. He and his family, including young Mark, had been traded out of Russia in the spy exchange involving Francis Gary Powers, the pilot of a U-2 shot down over Russia in a famous incident in 1960. After settling in America, the KGB colonel's son grew up to become a CIA pilot, flying U-2s over Russia, where his native Russian language skills proved useful. We were already well into spy lore, and we'd barely sat down. Wally was manipulated by someone with a lot of power, said Mark Subin. He was blackmailed. Rudy was the one person who knew what was going on. Subin had quite a bit of business with Wally Hillard. We learned he had a company, Skybus Incorporated, whose planes were shared in common with Hillard's Plane 1 Leasing. 3 of Skybus's 4 planes moved the Plane 1 Leasing to Skybus between March and August 2000. Plane 1 Leasing remained an owner of sorts. 2 of the planes that followed from Hillard's Plane 1 Leasing, tail numbers N11UN and N111UN, were listed as being owned by both Plane 1 Leasing and Skybus. We thought the UN designation on the tail number might be a clue. We were right. We discovered Subin had established a company called International Diplomatic Courier Services on August 28, 2001. We asked an aviation business owner about the planes with UN numbers. Coy Jacobs said the last letters in the N number are picked by the individual plane owner. So Subin and Hillard's 2 planes either flew for the UN or were trying to look like they did. Then we recognized the name of another business partner of Subin's, a man who gained a bit of fame during the savings and loan scandal of a decade ago. Mark Subin was in business with the notorious Ken Good. Kenneth Good was a big part of the Silverado saving and loans collapse. He was in business with Neil Bush. In fact, Ken Good had been so clearly a Bush family retainer that it strained credulity to think that Subin and Wally Hillard now were not similarly connected. In 1983, Neil Bush, President George H.W. Bush's son and our current president's brother, became partners in an oil venture with Ken Good and William Walters a Denver developer. 2 years later, Bush joined the board of Silverado, a Denver S&L, to which Walters and Good already owned more than $100 million. That was never to see the light of day again. Neil Bush received a $100,000 gift from Good as well as other major financial assistance. Yet he was pressing Silverado's management without mentioning these favors. To let Good off the hook on his debts, there was no conflict of interest. It was all just a coincidence. By the late summer of 1988, examiners made ready to seize the company. But then they got a phone call from the White House, according to Time magazine. The election was too close. Silverado's collapse would inevitably have spotlighted the Republican candidate's son, whose conduct had certainly been unethical and possibly illegal. So the bank's board seizure of Silverado was delayed. When Silverado finally collapsed, it cost U.S. taxpayers over $1 billion, but it hadn't been anybody's fault. The Houston Post's Peter Bruton, who broke the CIA mob connection to the saving and loan scandal, and Neil Bush's Silverado partners all had connections to individuals or S&Ls in Texas that did business with organized crime figures or CIA operatives. Good is one Silverado borrower who got a large loan at a Texas S&L connected to Herman Beebe, allegedly connected to the underworld. Herman Beebe was an intimate, as they say, of New Orleans mafia kingfish Carlos Marcello. So Ken Good hung with both the Bushes and the mob. Ken Good cost Americans over $132 million just from loans from Silverado. He was destitute, said Bush. Yet the very next year, the supposedly destitute Good donated $100,000 to the Republican Party. Subin's former partner, Kenneth Good, was an example of a certain type of rich person who is bankrupt for purposes of paying their bills, yet remains a fat cat when it comes to buy political influence. Sociologists call them elite deviants. They think of themselves as masters of the universe. When Neil Bush was called before Congress to defend himself against charges he'd faced to disclose potential conflicts of interest as a director of Silverado, he conceded he was a go-between with Silverado and his partner, Kenneth Good. Why do I want to say Good? But although the disclosure wasn't reflected in documents provided to Silverado directors, Neil Bush insisted he'd told Silverado officials that he was involved in an Argentina oil venture with Good. But when a government attorney asked him whether he should have corrected the document, Bush said, "Well, yeah, I would have if I were a real technical nitpicky guy." How strange to find ourselves, while profiling Atta's American associates, right back in the realm of spectacular and unsolved crime. Mohomed Atta's American connections were with people who were crooks, but a certain kind of crook, the well-connected kind. Subin and Good's partnership seemed to share a lot in common with Hillard Deckers and Richard Bolick's. Good's airline, Express One International, supplied both aircraft and crews to Skybus. The way Bolick had for Deckers and Hillard, and Subin's Fort Lauderdale-based carrier was soon to be bankrupt, a fate which Atta's Florida associates seemed to face with an awful regularity. Good's Express One draft the luck will itself soon be bankrupt, and in bankruptcy proceedings, the company's leading leaser will be revealed to be Finova Capital, a Canadian company linked to the CIA, and which also financed Iran-Contra-era proprietary airlines like Richard Secord's Southern Air Transport. Finova Capital. Mark Subin was every bit as fascinating a character as we'd been told. Subin told us much we didn't know about Wally Hillard's international associates. Wally owns an FBO in Nassau called Executive Jet Support with a guy named Alfonso Bo, stated Subin, whose sister is married to the Prime Minister of the Bahamas. He, Bo, also runs a flight school he started with Pervez Khan. Alfonso, we'd heard about. PJ Khan, we knew, had crashed one of Wally's Learjets in September of 2002, with 8 doctors on board. All 8 needed treatment. Other than that, he was a mystery, a Pakistani national who had somehow integrated himself with Southern Florida's movers and shakers. Hillard signed a contract with PJ Khan, who bought the old Air Florida certificate, said an aviation observer. PJ Khan moved in with Mr. Hillard's backing. He's an Arab operator with a license to fly an airline. Khan's got a contract with the U.S. Treasury Foreign Assets Control to fly directly to Havana. He has special permission as an authorized carrier to fly direct to Havana. We were puzzled. Foreign nationals aren't allowed to own U.S. air carriers. Also, U.S. air carriers aren't supposed to be flying to Havana. Puzzlement turned to incredulity when we heard from several people that PJ Khan had disappeared. I heard he has to flee the country for some reason, shrugged an aviation insider in Naples, who would say no more. Another of Hillard's executives in Naples was Chuck Hathaway, the VP of Ambassador Charter. We discovered a police report in Naples about a stolen Learjet Hathaway had supposedly flown in from Canada in 1999. Eventually, no charges were filed. Still, it was interesting enough, so we asked around about it in Naples. Chuck Hathaway flies for Continental Aviation, said John Villada. The Lear in Canada that Hathaway was suspected of stealing. Kevin Frater talked this Canadian guy into buying the Lear. Kevin Frater is involved in this. Frater, we were informed, had also disappeared recently after a partner was arrested with 400 pounds of heroin. He, too, had been in business with Mark Subin in a $25 million company they jointly owned. Heroin seems to be a leitmotif running through many of Wally Hillard's business connections. But these weren't dis-a-dem, dis-a-dos kind of guys. We'd already heard that the pilot on Hillard's seized Learjet doubled as chief pilot on Venezuela's Air Force One. Now we discovered that the co-pilot, conspicuously unnamed in court documents, had an interesting second career as well. He's a DEA agent. Mike Brassington was co-pilot with Diego Levine on the heroin runs on the Learjet. An insider in Naples said he is DEA assigned to Guyana. Several people told us that Hillard's former accountant, Stuart Burkill, had intimate knowledge of what was going on, so we set out to find him. After hearing several versions of what was obviously an incredible story, according to some, Wally Hillard's operation was penetrated by the KGB. Stewart ran all of Wally's businesses, Danielle Clark began. Wally said he wasn't happy with Rudy. Rudy said he would have his own accountant to do the books. Enters Stewart. Stewart was very efficient. Then one day we heard Stewart was going to Russia. He found someone on the internet, said Danielle. So Stewart went to Russia, and I'll never forget the day he came back with Anna, his new bride. She was about 6'3" and looked like Bridget Nielsen, Sly Stallone's ex-wife. She was just like a Barbie doll, and I thought, why does somebody that looks like this have to advertise on the internet for a friend? She had a 6-year-old daughter, and when they were together, they looked like Big Barbie and Little Barbie. She was a very spectacular looking woman. And Stuart is rather slight, you know, recalled Danielle with a smirk. He was, for a while, at quite some risk of domestic violence. Mark Subin got Stuart involved with Anna, said John Villata. He compressed the story this way. A really tall blonde woman got deported. Anna's parents were KGB. Stuart brought a Russian girl back from the KGB, married her, and brought her here. Stuart was warned that if anything ever happened to Anna, he was dead. Then Wally started wondering how Stuart knew so much all of a sudden. And that's when it came out that Stuart's new girlfriend was involved with the KGB. Stuart went from a little rinky-dink apartment to a brand new $1 million home with all new furniture, maids, the whole bit. And that's when Wally started getting suspicious and went through the roof. Hillard expressed his disappointments by having employee Burkill charged with embezzlement. Rudy and Stewart embezzled $500,000 from Wally, said another former Hillard employee. Then Stewart took the rap. Nobody knows why. Stewart took the rap for Rudy in the embezzlement case, confirmed a source. Wally turned him in, and then Wally sued him, but he kept Stewart working for him. And I said to him, how can you sue Stewart and still have him working for you at the same time? Hillard's response had been non-commercial. At least he was consistent. After a brief search, we found Stuart Burkill still in Naples and still working occasionally for Hillard. I am still friendly with my ex-wife today, Stuart told us. Anna is haughty and egotistical. Her uncle was a big businessman in aviation over Russia, in the Russian mob. I met her on the internet at RussianBride.com, and his father's name is Boris Georgieva. He's a former Russian Olympic gold medalist in the shot put. When we questioned Wally Hillard about Stuart Burkill, a guy he had busted for embezzlement of $500,000, we asked if his displeasure with Burkill owed anything to his Russian bride's curious connections. I don't know anything about a Russian bride, Hillard replied blandly. I don't know anything about her connections. All I know is that he started writing checks a week after he came to work for me and never stopped. And so that is why he got charged with embezzlement. If he doesn't do a couple of years, I'll be disappointed. I'm not mad at him, Hillard explained. I'd just be disappointed. Someone still working for Hillard explained the Burkill imbroglio this way. Never heard of that word. Burkill's imbroglio this way. Someone still working for Hillard explained the Burkill imbroglio this way. Wally's accountant, Stewart, discovered that money for Wally's flight school was really being used for something else. All of this might be nothing more than anecdotal or even prurient interest, but for the fact that there were so many important and unanswered questions about the man who financed Rudy Decker's terror flight school. One of Hillard's ventures, for example, is called Oryx LLC, and Oryx is a kind of African gazelle, we learned, and a British mining company in Africa named Oryx was accused by the BBC of having links to Al-Qaeda and trading blood diamonds. We asked Hillard to tell us how he had come to name a company Oryx. He declined. There is a company called Oryx, said Hillard. If I thought it were germane to anything, I would tell you. But I don't see it germane to anything. We persisted. It's a strange name. I just wanted to know why you named the company Oryx. I didn't, replied Hillard. There's no relationship. My relationship with them is small. There are other people involved, and therefore I am not going to talk about a company that is owned by others. Whoever Oryx is and whatever it was incorporated to do, Wallace J. Hillard most assuredly owns the company, according to filings with the Florida Department of Corporations and FAA. We always get intrigued when we discover we've been lied to. When people lie, it's always for a reason. Did diamonds fit into Wallys' South African dealings? Was that where the name Oryx comes from? When we finally got the chance to ask Hillard about Mark Subin, his reply was, another name I wish I never heard of. How do you meet these guys, especially since you look like you should be playing golf, we asked. Hillard used an aphorism to describe his version of the series of seemingly inexplicable business decisions that ultimately had horrifyingly tragic results. I have done some very stupid things with airplanes, and it has cost me a lot of money, he said, pausing before delivering the punchline. Brilliance has its limitations, but stupidity has none. It sounded like a line scripted by one of Bob Hope's writers, but he kept coming back to answer our specific questions. Hillard actually used it so frequently that it got to the point where he just alluded to it in shorthand. The difference between brilliance and stupidity, he'd say tersely. It developed a rhythm. Hillard began to sound like somebody practicing pleading the fifth. I refuse to answer that question, Senator. The difference between genius and stupidity, sadly for Hillard. However, we don't think stupidity, should it ever come to it, is a valid legal defense. And even if it were, the slim and sharp-eyed man lounging elegantly across from us in a gray golf sweater, affixed with the insignia of the Augusta National Country Club, would have a difficult time convincing a jury that he was in any way mentally challenged or impaired. Why? The thought came unbidden. Very few stupid people ever own that many Lear jets or get that much heroin. That's it for Chapter 20. Chapter 21, Living with Mohomed. Tomorrow.